I'm Ian from Sanyou, and this is the tasting table. At the tasting table, I'm going to try a heap of Baijius, sometimes alone, sometimes with a guest. I'll get some distillers from Tasmania, some foodies from Tasmania, and introduce them to Baijiu and just talk about this amazing spirit category. So we'll start at the start, this being the first one. What is Baijiu is the question I always get asked. So Baijiu translates to white liquor or white wine. So as a category, it's usually bottled sort of from the 40% up to high 60s, which makes it quite a potent spirit to drink. And it varies a heap across the different regions of China. And each region has its own category and style and method of making Baijiu. And while we were in China, you could literally buy a bottle of Baijiu, 100 ml for $5 at the local 7-Eleven corner store, or you could go next door to the bottle shop and find a bottle for $10,000. So it's like a big spirit category that's very diverse, but when you're drinking a Baijiu, you know it's Baijiu. So this being the first one, we thought we'd start with the most famous brand of Baijiu that's made, and that's Moutai. So Moutai is a town in China, in central China, where they make this style of Baijiu, which is classified as sauce aroma. The sauce in that is soy sauce flavors. So a few things make sauce aroma Baijiu interesting. One's the method it's made with, the ingredients it's made with, and the location it's made in. So the method for making a sauce aroma Baijiu is a year-long cycle. It's they use the same grain 8 times for 8 different fermentations and distillations, and then they use those 8 distillations to make that year's vintage effectively. And what's really interesting about Baijiu, the more traditional and higher end Baijius, is the way it's fermented and distilled. It's solid state fermentation and distillation. So what that means is everything from the fermentation to the distillation is done on cooked grain at the consistency of roughly cooked rice. And the first time you actually see liquid is when the Baijiu is coming out of the still. So I'll take you through the process. To make Baijiu, sauce aroma Baijiu, there's sort of 2 distinct steps in the method. The first is to make a product called Chu. So Chu is basically a starter or an inoculant for the fermentation. It acts as the starter to get the starch in the grain to go to sugar, and then that sugar to alcohol. To make Chu, in sauce aroma style Baijiu, you basically take wheat, just wheat, crush it, mix it with water, mix it with some old Chu to get the process started, and then squish that into a brick that's roughly 300 ml by 200 ml by about 150 ml high. And that brick is then put into a room with a heap of other Chu bricks at room temperature. And naturally, the internal temperature of that Chu brick will go from, say, 25 degrees room temperature up to 55 degrees with no added heat. It's just all natural fermentation, and then back down to room temperature over the course of around 30 days. Once you have that brick, it's gone through that temperature profile, it's quite dry. You leave that to age for about 6 months, and then you crush that into a powder to use. And so that Chu brick has the elements of the natural yeasts that are on the wheat, and then also a microbiotic profile, effectively mold, both of those things work together to get from starch to alcohol. So once you've got your Chu bricks made, which is, they make that all year round because it's always in demand, you take red sorghum as the main grain. You steam that on the first cycle. You steam it in your still to soften it so that the starch on the inside is accessible. And then you cool that off, add some powdered Chu, mix that all together. It's all in the consistency of roughly cooked rice. And then you put that into a fermenting bin in the ground. So these fermenting bins are clay brick lined. All the grain is put in there, 12 tons of it approximately. And then it's sealed off with a cap of mud, of wet mud at about 100 ml over the whole thing, because the thing compresses down, so you've got to keep your mud wet so that it goes down with it. That fermentation goes for 30 to 45 days, depending on which distillery you are in. And then once that's done, you peel off the mud, and then you scoop out all of that grain, and then you run it through its distillation process. So the fermentation is solid state on cooked grain. So unlike a regular or Western style spirit, the fermented grain is not boiled, steam is run through it. So in a whiskey, you'll take a liquid and then you'll create alcohol in that liquid. It's effectively like a hopless beer that they distill, and they boil the liquid to get the alcohol to come out of it. In Source Aroma Baijius, and a lot of Baijius, the premium Baijius, they use a still just like the one here. So this is effectively like a dumpling steamer. Steam comes from the blue things in the background there. It's delivered to this bottom basin, and then this main section has a perforated floor, a holy floor, and you carefully add your grain to that middle section, put the lid on, put the line arm on, and then the steam is delivered to the bottom, runs through the grain. In the course of running through the grain, strips off the alcohol, and then the alcohol is delivered by the line arm into the condenser, and then out comes the Baijiu. Then that grain, this whole section lifts up, that grain is then cooled, and then more chew is added, and then it's added back into the fermentation pit for its next rotation. So the year cycle for a Source Aroma Baijiu is doing that process 8 times with the exact same grain, and each one gives its own sort of different characteristics as the grain becomes softer, more caramelized. The chew acts differently on each grain, and so each distillation has its own thing, and you blend those together to create your that year's vintage, basically. So the first time we saw liquid was when Baijiu was coming out of the condenser. That Baijiu is aged in these giant big clay pots, about 1,000-litre clay pots, almost as tall as a person, and it's aged in these pots, and that pot really gives it an opportunity to do some oxidization because it's covered, the pot neck is about 300 mil. That's covered with a layer of paper and then a layer of plastic and then sealed and then tied off. And basically the volatile elements of the Baijiu come up through the paper, condensate on the plastic, and then drip onto the paper, giving it the ability to wick out some of the more volatile products, and then also for some air to breathe in there. And then also spirits just go through a chemical process of their own over time. So there's no really imparted flavour from the clay pot because it's a glazed pot, but the aging process really changes the Baijiu a lot. So that's how Source Aroma Baijiu is made and aged. And a premium product like Moutai probably doesn't use a spirit until it's at least 3 years old as their base spirit, but you can buy a bottle of Moutai that's got a 50-year age statement on it. So we'll give the Baijiu a taste. So this Moutai style is basically always bottled at 53% ABV, making it quite a strong spirit to drink. But they drink it in these tiny little 10 to 15 mil glasses, so it makes it a bit more doable. There we go. So you can see it's a clear spirit, a white spirit with a lot of flavour. So right away I can smell the Source aroma and almost a bit of nuttiness. It's really interesting in Baijiu. Instead of tasting the impartation of a barrel on a spirit or the botanicals or the flavourings that you put into the spirit, what you can taste in a Baijiu is the fermentation itself. So this spirit really smells like when this distillery is operating. Like on a fermentation or distillation day, our distillery smells a lot like what I'm smelling here. So very soy saucy, sort of umami sort of flavours and smells. So I'll give it a taste. A really full mouthfeel with a real soy saucy, umami, a bit earthy in some ways, the flavour. And then some sweet notes coming through and a really long mouthfeel. It really travels all the way down your tongue. Yeah, it's a really full mouthfeel with the tingle, the sensation moving down my mouth, and it's a really long mouthfeel, which is what sort of their claim to fame is when you're trying a Baijiu with an experienced Baijiu drinker, they would talk about long mouthfeel a lot, and Moutai really nails that. It's a really complex flavour, so many elements in there. The sweet notes are sort of fruity, citrusy. It's a beautiful flavour. Like, the first time I had Baijiu, I just fell in love with it, to be honest with you, and that's how I've ended up with this distillery. But it's a really complex flavour, really interesting flavour notes in there, just a really full mouthfeel of just heaps of different flavours, and just really nice flavour. And Baijiu is actually drunk usually with a meal, so it really complements sort of a Sichuan spicy meal. If you're having a meal with it, it's very complementary in flavours, being that soy saucy umami sort of flavour. Yeah, so this is our first tasting table. We'll hope to bring you a heap more. I'll also try and capture a few people's first tasting of Baijiu to sort of see how they react and enjoy it. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.